Innovation. This is a word you really should know well. It is a very powerful word. Innovation is a process of improving on what we do. As humans, we innovate all the time. From small innovations like adding salt or spices to bland dishes to improve the taste, to very large innovations like the James Webb Telescope, helping us see the most distant galaxies like we've never seen them before. Innovation has been one of the constants available to the human species since the beginning of time. Very, very, very early humans started to create innovation in farming, starting with the idea of collecting and growing food from seeds. Early humans learned the value of farming, and over the generations the lessons were passed down, and each generation discovered and developed new and better ways to grow and store food for everyone. Farmers learned how the soil works, what it needs to produce year after year. It's a very complicated science, and over the years farmers have been getting better and better and smarter and smarter. From learning to rotate the types of crops, to ensure the soil is utilized and replenished, to learning how to use global positioning systems to ensure that farmers are efficient down to the meter, or even less.
In fact, farmers for decades have been trying to figure out a better way to utilize every ounce of product that they put down, whether this be nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, manganese, boron, all these other little things that make for a healthy plant. Because a healthy plant produces more food, which means cheaper food for you at the store. There's variable rate technology so that we are not putting excess fertilizer in places that will not grow a great crop, and places that will grow a great crop will get extra fertilizer. There has been upgrades in precision farming that allow for accurate fertilizer placement, where it's going to be close enough to the seed early on that it hits it right away and it starts using it. Those roots just tap into it, starts growing plant. And not too close that it hurts the plant.
With farmers at the heart of the innovation of farming since the very early days, it makes no sense to me why we're not turning to them as the experts in the field of fertilizers. Farmers quite literally invented fertilizer, going all the way back to recorded time when Egyptians, Romans, Babylonians, and the early Germans all were recorded as using minerals and or manure to enhance the productivity of their farms. The innovation didn't stop there. Fish was used as a fertilizer, at least as early as 1620. In the early days of trade, we even see fertilizers start to become in demand around the world as people needed to find ways to feed growing populations. In the 19th century, guano, which had been known and used in the Andes for at least 1500 years, was taken in large quantities from Peru and Chile to Europe and the USA. I do trust our farmers as being the experts in farming with fertilizer, and more specifically, just how much they need to use. Farmers have been innovating and carefully measuring and using fertilizer forever, as farmer Devin Brown explains.
Farmers absolutely hate being wasteful. Every pound of fertilizer we put on, every pound of seed that we put on is calculated. It's a risk versus reward ratio, and we want to do our best to make good crops for you guys so that we can continue doing that. It doesn't make sense for us to be wasteful. The stakes are way too high. It is way too risky to be laissez-faire with fertilizer, which was at an all-time high last year.
As Devin makes it clear, and common sense would also support him, farmers are not wasteful people. However, that is not what our government wants you to believe when they're calling for a 30% reduction in fertilizer emission by 2030. Bloomberg, in July 2022, reported that Trudeau spars with farmers on climate plan, risking grain output, and Canada wants to cut fertilizer emission, but farmers say it could result in less food. Going on to say that our Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's push to accelerate the fight against climate change is sparking a showdown with the nation's farmers, who says it's threatening food supplies and their profits. The government is proposing to cut emissions from fertilizers 30% by 2030, as part of a plan to get to a net zero in the next 3 decades. But growers are saying that to achieve that, they may have to shrink grain output significantly at a time when the world is scrambling for more supplies.
So what has me all wound up? Well, this week, the federal government has announced, after consulting with regional and provincial agriculture representatives and ministers, as in it went and talked to them and didn't listen at all. Just, I'm going to talk to you to say I talked to you, but then I'm going to do my own thing regardless. They've announced that they want a 30% reduction in nitrogen emissions in the next few years here.
People, the government is not listening to the farmers, the very people who invented fertilizers and have been innovating with fertilizers for centuries. The government is actively fighting with our farmers. However, what about the science? Is that on the government side? Maybe the science will help. Let's go back just 1 century to the 20th century to find that answer specifically on nitrogen fertilizers. Starting with the Haber process. Wikipedia states, in the early decades of the 20th century, the Nobel Prize-winning chemists Carl Bosch and Fritz Haber developed the Haber process, which utilizes molecular nitrogen and methane gas in an economically sustainable synthesis of ammonia. Then Wikipedia goes on to inform us that the ammonia produced in the Haber process is the main raw material in the Ostwald process. In a nutshell, today, globally, we are still producing the world's nitrogen-based fertilizer based on the Haber process. Why is this so important? Well, in January 2017, the British Broadcasting Corporation was all too proud to report that nitrogen-based fertilizer helped feed the world, clearly stating specifically that it had been called one of the greatest inventions of the 20th century, and without it, almost half the world's population would not be alive today. They go on to explain that 100 years ago, 2 German chemists, Fritz Haber and Carl Bosch, devised a way to transform nitrogen in the air into fertilizer, using what has become known as the Haber-Bosch process. Did you catch that? It's a very, very important detail. How is nitrogen-based fertilizer made? Using a Haber-Bosch process, sure, but again, what does that mean? I'll read it again. It's a way to transform nitrogen in the air into fertilizer. Nitrogen in the air. The nitrogen comes from the air. It turns into a tangible product that can be shipped and then used and released back in the air. It means that nitrogen-based fertilizer is a closed-loop system. Environmentally speaking, it's a closed-loop system. Don't take my word for it. Here's a TED Talk from 2013 saying exactly this.
What would you say is the most important discovery made in the past few centuries? Is it the computer, the car, electricity, or maybe the discovery of the atom? I would argue that it is this chemical reaction. A nitrogen gas molecule plus 3 hydrogen gas molecules gets you 2 ammonia gas molecules. This is the Haber process of binding nitrogen molecules in the air to hydrogen molecules, or turning air into fertilizer. Without this reaction, farmers would be capable of producing enough food for only 4 billion people. Our current population is just over 7 billion people. So without the Haber process, over 3 billion people would be without food.
Wow. And this closed-loop system even has a name. It's called the nitrogen cycle. Here's a video that goes into a little bit more detail.
Welcome to Moo Moo Math and Science. In this video, I'd like to talk about the nitrogen cycle. Our atmosphere is made up of 78% nitrogen. We need the nitrogen for our DNA and for proteins, but we just can't breathe in the nitrogen like oxygen, but we must absorb our nitrogen in our food. Nitrogen follows a cycle where it travels from the atmosphere to the soil, to animals, and back, an innate cycle.
And what did Wikipedia have to say about the Haber process? It is an economically sustainable synthesis of ammonia. So what's the problem here? How is any cutback on nitrogen-based fertilizer going to impact the nitrogen level in the air? It will not. The more nitrogen-based fertilizer that is needed, the more nitrogen is removed from the air to make the nitrogen-based fertilizer. Closed-loop system. The confusion could be around where do people think nitrogen comes from to make nitrogen-based fertilizer? Do you think there was a factory somewhere just pumping out new nitrogen that is overwhelming our environment? No, not at all. It is collected from the very same environment that is later released into. So, why is our government ignoring farmers, the very experts, and ignoring the constant innovations? And, frankly, ignoring the science on the nitrogen-based fertilizer issue? That's a great question. How about asking your MP directly, especially the conservative MPs, on why they're allowing this to happen? And do your own research. Look into the nitrogen cycle, the Haber process, and farmers' innovations, and then ask yourself if the Liberal government has even taken a look at this information themselves. Looks like they have not, or worse, maybe they know and they're just ignoring it? The government is supposed to listen to the people. However, in this case, not only is the current Liberal government calling for unnecessary caps and reductions on nitrogen-based fertilizer uses, the Conservative Party, and likely our future government, are the ones currently allowing it to happen. I'm calling on all farmers and on all people who like to eat food to contact your MPs now and demand that they stop this harmful agenda and listen to the Canadian experts, the farmers. Tell your MPs what you think, and demand as loudly as you can that you expect our government to work in the interests of the people. And if you really want to make a big difference in the next election, make sure you get behind and support a few independents in your province. We don't need many of us in the House of Commons to make a change. When all the parties are being watched by a handful of independents, they act far more accordingly. And when independents are pushing for and asking the very hard questions, they'll have to answer, and believe me when I say this, I'll make sure that they answer for all of us very soon. Thank you for watching, God bless, and have a wonderful day. And if you liked this video, remember to like and subscribe and press that notification button to receive more information like this. You can also follow me at yellowhead.vote to stay informed and get the inside scoop. Thank you.